Okay, revision video 2. Let's go. This question, which is based around the statement the US Congress is significantly more representative than the UK Parliament, I've chosen because it's pretty nasty, really. What you'd have to do is make sure you had a plan about how you'd answer this type of question and know what you could hang it on. So how would we go about answering the question? Well, first of all, we need to understand what we mean by representation. We need to know our terminology, and then we need to know what criteria we're going to use to do the comparison on. In terms of representation, which could be used in the introduction, you certainly want a definition of what representation means, because it could be substantive representation in terms of how the views are actually recognized of constituents, or it could be talking about more descriptive representation about how the chamber actually looks as a reflection of the nation. So that's where we've got to work on those particular two areas. In terms of key terminology, with the United States, what you need to know is the nature of the chambers, the size of the chambers, what they represent, and some statistics based around the nature of the representation that exists within it. The same with the UK, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, the nature of the terminology around those and the parties, but also the representative statistics as well. All right, so what are the three areas I want to compare? Well, representation is all about effectively representing the political culture. So it could be a descriptive representation of the nation, or it could be a discussion about the level of party influence as against representatives. Or then you could also consider the second chambers, in terms of the Senate versus the House of Lords. I think there's two aspects to a debate around this, and one is that both Congress and Parliament have suffered with the view that they're alienated from their electorate. There's a declining turnout, which suggests that actually people don't buy into those institutions as much as perhaps they should do. Or you could take the line that in fact in the UK the issue of representation is much highlighted by the fact that we have an unelected House of Lords which demands reform, and therefore it would seem that Congress is a more democratic chamber in that sense. Alright, first point. So we're looking at the method of judging representation through descriptive nature of the composition. Does it look like the nation? And when you consider Congress and Parliament together, in terms of gender, it's very similar in many ways. You could almost argue that Parliament is slightly higher in terms of the proportion of women, with 34% in the Commons as against 27% in the House of Representatives. In terms of education, you would say also that there's similarities there with around about 90% in both having degrees, whereas in the population there's only 34%, showing a discrepancy in the nature of representation there. In terms of ethnicity, again, a similar percentage, but the significant difference here is that it's much less proportionate to the population in the US. Crucially, if you're talking about does it represent the nation and the voting of the representation, both chambers are dominated by two main parties, and therefore minor parties, such as the Reform Party of the United States or the Greens in the UK, surely gain representation, all of which implies that neither Congress or Parliament are that clearly descriptive of the nations they represent, with perhaps the greater concern being the United States with the alienation of ethnic groups, certainly in modern times. Second point, the House of Commons could be argued to be more representative than the House of Representatives. Well, you would argue that based on the number of representatives that exist. In the House of Commons, 650 MPs covers the population of the UK, whereas only 435 districts cover the whole of the United States. So clearly there's a greater representation per person in the UK. However, there are similarities. You'd have to say the similarities in the Commons and the representations in the sense that they used first past the post system, and therefore is the domination by the two major parties, the Democrats and Republicans in the United States, the Labour Party and the Conservatives in the UK. And you would say that the larger states, because they're reflecting population, dominate the House of Representatives, similarly to the way in which southern regions of the UK, which is more populous, dominate the House of Commons. It's also been considered that MPs in the Commons are more dominated by party interests, and it would suggest perhaps that the representatives is a better house in terms of responsiveness to constituency interests. Of course, there's other factors that relate to that, but that's maybe a point of contrast you can raise. So overall, it would seem to be quite and not much of a significant representative difference between the Commons and the representatives. The most obvious thing being the ratio, and that's maybe why I would focus on that point in my evaluation. Second point, the US Senate is more clearly representative than the House of Lords. Well, the US Senate is composed of 100 senators who are elected or re-elected every 6 years. This compares to the Lords, which is obviously appointed by the Independent Commission. You know, the elected chamber of the Senate can claim a mandate for the territorial areas. It complements the House of Representatives, who represents the people. The House of Lords cannot claim any mandate due to having a large of life peers, including hereditary peers and bishops. And this is clearly called for reform for either a partial elected chamber or a fully elected chamber, in a similarity to the Senate as well. It can, however, be argued, and this is a contrast and maybe a benefit of the Lords, that the nature of the expertise in the Lords provides a different type of representation, which can protect minority groups, and because they're not professional politicians, remove some of the partisanship that exists within the Senate. However, it's quite obvious that the elected composition of the Senate makes it significantly more important than the Lords. Okay, so where's my conclusion? I'll probably take the line the US Congress is significantly more representative, although there are clearly similarities between the democratic composition of each and the representative nature of the Commons and the House of Reps. There are clear differences, the most obvious one being the Senate compared to the Lords, and the fact that the motivation of representatives generally being more focused with constituents in the United States than with party interests in the UK. Okay, thank you.